Imagine becoming invisible while watching another person steal your identity, your work, and your entire life. Have you ever felt invisible in a world full of voices? Imagine being a writer whose words are read, but whose existence is no longer seen. Today, we delve into the chilling tale of the invisible writer, a story that blurs the line between creativity and identity, between existence and erasure. Welcome back to LMJ English, where we explore fascinating stories that not only entertain, but also help you improve your English skills. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of language enthusiasts. Turn on notifications to never miss our weekly stories that bring English learning to life. Our story today explores what happens when a writer seeking solitude for his craft encounters something far more sinister than writer's block. It's a tale of ambition, strange occurrences, and a horrifying transformation that will make you question the very nature of identity. So sit back, relax, and let's begin this journey into the supernatural world of the invisible writer. The writer's ambition. In the cold month of January, a writer with grand aspirations decided to embark on a journey that would change his life forever. He was not just any writer. He was a man possessed by the burning desire to create something magnificent, a book of considerable length and depth that would cement his place in literary history. His home, with its familiar distractions and comfortable routines, was no longer conducive to the monumental task he had set for himself. He needed solitude, silence, and a fresh environment where his creativity could flourish uninterrupted. After days of searching, he found it, a small, nondescript room that seemed tailor-made for a writer in pursuit of greatness. This is a good room for a writer, he thought to himself, surveying the modest space with satisfaction. The room was indeed small, but its simplicity was its charm. A bed, a table, a chair, and an antique mirror on the wall. These were all the possessions he needed for his craft. The absence of distractions was a blessing, and the quiet that enveloped the room was almost tangible, like a protective cocoon around his creative mind. He settled in quickly, arranging his sparse belongings and setting up his writing space with meticulous care. The table was positioned just so, allowing the natural light to fall gently on his pages without casting shadows. His favorite pen, a constant companion through years of writing, was placed with reverence next to a stack of pristine paper. Everything was ready for the birth of his masterpiece. The first few days were blissful. Words flowed effortlessly from his mind to the page. Characters sprang to life under his pen, and the storyline unfolded with organic precision. He wrote for hours each day, losing himself in the world he was creating. When evening fell, he would read over his day's work with a sense of accomplishment that filled him with joy. This room, this simple space, was indeed magical for his craft. He felt connected to his writing in a way he never had before, as if the very walls absorbed his creativity and reflected it back to him in more potent form. His routine was perfect. Wake up at the dawn, write until his mind needed rest, take a short break, and then return to his desk with renewed vigor. He rarely left the room, preferring to maintain the bubble of creativity he had established. When he did venture out for essentials, he hurried back, eager to return to his literary world. It was during one of these brief excursions that the first strange incident occurred, an incident that would mark the beginning of his extraordinary and terrifying transformation from visible to invisible writer. First signs of strangeness? The first peculiar incident occurred on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. The writer had been working diligently since morning, his pen dancing across the paper as he crafted intricate passages for his book. Suddenly, a craving for coffee interrupted his flow. Realizing he had depleted his supply, he reluctantly decided to pause his work and visit the nearby shop. He carefully placed his pen, a cherished instrument of his craft, on the table and headed out. When he returned, refreshed and ready to resume his creative endeavors, a disconcerting discovery awaited him. His pen, which he distinctly remembered leaving on the table, had vanished. Puzzled, he searched the obvious places, the floor, his chair, and then the table once more, but the pen was nowhere to be found. "I don't understand it," he muttered to himself, baffled by this inexplicable disappearance. The room was small, with minimal furnishings, making the pen's absence all the more perplexing. After an exhaustive search yielded nothing, he reluctantly retrieved a spare pen from his case and continued writing, though a lingering unease had taken root in his mind. That night brought a new disturbance that shattered the tranquility of his sanctuary. Lying in bed, surrounded by the profound silence of the room, the writer was drifting toward sleep when his eyes suddenly snapped open. A voice, distinctly male and unfamiliar, had broken the stillness. "Who's there?" he called out, his heart pounding in his chest. No response came, and a careful inspection of the room confirmed he was alone. The voice had been clear, not a remnant of a dream or a sound from outside. It had originated within the room itself, yet there was no one else present. Despite these unsettling occurrences, the writer's determination to complete his book remained unshaken. He rationalized the strange events. Perhaps he had absent-mindedly moved the pen elsewhere. Maybe the voice was a trick of acoustics, sound carrying from a neighboring room. Yet, as days passed, similar incidents multiplied. Objects would shift positions when he wasn't looking. Whispers would permeate the silence during the darkest hours of night, and an inexplicable chill would occasionally envelop the room despite the adequate heating. The writer began to develop rituals to combat his growing unease. He would check and recheck the lock on his door, place objects in specific arrangements to detect any movement, and leave a light on at night to dispel the shadows that seemed increasingly menacing. Still, he persisted with his writing, finding that immersing himself in his creative world offered temporary relief from the strange reality that was encroaching upon him. The book was progressing well, almost as if fueled by the mysterious energy that permeated the room. Even as the peculiar phenomena intensified, the writer maintained a stubborn belief that there must be logical explanations for everything occurring around him. This belief, however fragile, allowed him to continue his work despite the mounting evidence that something beyond his understanding was unfolding in his small, once peaceful writing room. Little did he know that these strange occurrences were merely preludes to a far more terrifying reality that would soon challenge not just his peace of mind, but his very existence. The man in the mirror, the ancient mirror hanging on the wall, had always been a feature of the room that the writer appreciated for its character and vintage charm. Its ornate frame and slightly clouded glass spoke of histories and stories from years past, complementing his creative space perfectly. He often glanced at it while pondering a difficult passage, finding that sometimes seeing his own reflection helped clarify his thoughts. It was during one such moment of contemplation that the mirror revealed something that defied all rational explanation. Raising his eyes to the mirror as he had done countless times before, the writer froze in shock. Instead of his own clean-shaven face staring back at him, he saw a stranger, a man with a full beard and eyes that seemed to hold a knowing gleam. Gasping, the writer shut his eyes tightly, convinced that fatigue had caused a momentary hallucination. When he opened them again and looked back at the mirror, his own familiar features had returned. Relief washed over him, though it was tinged with lingering doubt. That didn't happen, he told himself firmly, trying to banish the disturbing image from his mind. I was wrong. There wasn't another man. Yet the incident had shaken him deeply. For the first time since moving into the room, the writer felt compelled to distance himself from his work and his increasingly unsettling surroundings. He left for a walk, wandering aimlessly through the streets, his mind replaying the vision in the mirror. The fresh air and bustling normality of the outside world provided temporary comfort, but a sense of dread followed him like a shadow. He delayed his return until evening, reluctant to face the room and its mysterious mirror again. When night fell, the writer finally returned, steeling himself as he entered the room. The quiet that had once been so conducive to his writing now seemed charged with an ominous presence. Cautiously, he approached the mirror, afraid of what he might see, but needing confirmation that the earlier incident had indeed been a figment of his imagination. To his immense relief, his own reflection greeted him, unchanged and normal. Still, his peace of mind had been irrevocably disturbed. That night, as he lay in bed struggling to find sleep, a decision crystallized in his mind. I'll leave here tomorrow, he resolved, finally acknowledging that the strange occurrences had become too much to bear. This decision brought a measure of calm, and eventually sleep claimed him. But slumber offered no escape from the escalating strangeness. In the darkness of night, the writer was jolted awake by a presence beside his bed. Opening his eyes, he saw the bearded man from the mirror standing over him, no longer confined to the reflective surface, but physically present in the room. You will never leave here, the figure declared, his voice the same one the writer had heard on nights past. You will stay with me. The writer's blood turned to ice, his body paralyzed with terror as the implications of the apparition's words sank in. This was no dream, no hallucination. The bearded man was real, and his intentions were becoming frighteningly clear. The horrifying realization. In the gripping aftermath of the nocturnal visitation, the writer found himself overwhelmed by a terror so profound that it propelled him into immediate action. I'll leave now, he thought desperately, unable to tolerate another minute in the room that had transformed from a creative sanctuary into a nightmarish prison. His hands trembled as he hastily gathered his belongings, stuffing clothes and writing materials into his case with frantic urgency. The memory of the bearded man's ominous declaration, "You will never leave here," echoed relentlessly in his mind, driving him to escape before the prophecy could be fulfilled. As he packed, a pervasive coldness enveloped the room, seeping into his bones despite the warmth of the season. Fear gripped him with increasing intensity, though he struggled to articulate exactly what terrified him so. Was it the bearded stranger who had appeared by his bed? The inexplicable events that had disrupted his peace? Or was it something deeper, a fundamental shift in reality that he sensed but couldn't yet comprehend? With his case finally packed, the writer took one last look around the room that had been both his creative haven and the site of increasingly disturbing phenomena. His gaze inevitably landed on the antique mirror, the portal through which he had first glimpsed the bearded man. Drawn to it despite his fear, he approached for a final glance at his reflection before departing. What he saw, or rather, what he didn't see, sent a shock of horror through his entire being. The mirror's surface reflected the room in perfect detail. The bed with its rumpled sheets, the table with scattered papers, the chair pushed aside in his haste. But his own image was completely absent. There was no face, no body, no sign that he stood before the mirror at all. The writer tried to cry out in shock, but to his mounting horror, no sound emerged from his throat. He had lost not only his reflection, but his voice as well, as if his very existence was being systematically erased from reality. It was then that movement caught his eye. The bearded man had manifested again, not in the mirror this time, but physically in the room. He sat calmly at the writer's table, the writer's own pen in his hand, continuing the manuscript as if it had been his all along. The grotesque intimacy of this usurpation flooded the writer with rage, a burning fury at having not just his space, but his identity and creative work stolen from him. He attempted to shout, to demand answers, to reclaim what was rightfully his, but his voicelessness rendered him impotent. His anger, terror, and desperation had no outlet, confined within a form that was becoming increasingly insubstantial. The bearded man never acknowledged the writer's presence, never glanced up from the manuscript to observe the original author's distress. Instead, he wrote with focused determination, a slight smile playing on his lips as he appropriated not just the book, but the entire identity of the writer who had created it. The horrifying realization dawned on the original writer. He was being replaced, not just physically but existentially, his entire being subsumed by this mysterious doppelganger with the beard. As the bearded usurper continued to write, the original author's sense of self grew increasingly fragmented, his connection to the physical world weakening with each word penned by his replacement. Complete displacement. The sound of knocking at the door broke the terrible tableau. The bearded man writing at the desk, the original writer standing invisibly in a room that no longer acknowledged his existence. A familiar voice called from the hallway. "Are you there? I want to see you." It was the writer's friend, a welcome connection to the normal world he was rapidly losing his grip on. A surge of desperate hope filled the invisible writer. Surely his friend would recognize the imposter, would see that something was terribly wrong. The bearded man rose from the desk with casual confidence and moved toward the door. The invisible writer tried to intercept him, to prevent the meeting that would further cement his displacement, but his efforts had no physical impact. He could only watch helplessly as the bearded man opened the door with a welcoming smile. "Come in," the imposter said with the writer's voice, perfectly mimicking his cadence and tone. "Come and see my room. I'm writing my book." The friend entered, his familiar face lighting up with pleasure at seeing someone he believed was his longtime acquaintance. The invisible writer frantically tried to signal his presence, moving between his friend and the imposter, gesturing wildly, attempting to speak despite knowing his voice had been stolen. His efforts were futile. His friend's gaze passed through him, as if he were truly nothing more than air. There was no recognition, no awareness that anything was amiss. "Oh, you have a beard now," the friend remarked casually, accepting this significant change with the ease of someone noting a new haircut or outfit. This simple observation confirmed the writer's worst fears. The bearded man had successfully assumed his identity not just in this room, but in the wider world. Even those who knew him intimately now accepted the imposter without question, the beard apparently the only notable difference between the original and his replacement. As the two engaged in conversation, discussing the progress of the book and sharing news, the invisible writer experienced a profound and devastating isolation. He existed in a liminal space, present yet unseen, conscious yet unable to affect the world around him. His reality had become a nightmare of witnessing his own life continue without him, his relationships and work appropriated by a mysterious entity whose origins and motivations remained unfathomable. The visit concluded, and the friend departed, having never suspected that he had been conversing with an imposter. The bearded man returned to the desk, to the manuscript, seamlessly continuing the creative work that had once been the invisible writer's purpose and passion. The usurpation was complete, extending beyond the confines of the small room, to encompass the entirety of the writer's existence. His identity had been fully colonized, his presence in the world erased so thoroughly that even those closest to him perceived no substitution. Yet amidst this complete displacement, one faculty remained to the invisible writer: the ability to tell his story. Though voiceless and unseen, he discovered he could still record his experience, documenting the supernatural theft of his life and identity. This singular connection to his former existence became his lifeline, the only proof that he had ever been real at all. In this cruel irony, the invisible writer found both his greatest torment and his sole remaining purpose: to bear witness to his own erasure and to ensure that somewhere, somehow, the truth of what had happened to him would be known. The invisible storyteller. In the cruel aftermath of his complete displacement, the writer made a profound discovery that would become both his salvation and his testimony. Despite his invisibility to the physical world, despite the theft of his voice and identity, he retained one crucial ability: he could still write. This singular power, the very skill that had defined his existence before the supernatural transformation, remained intact, a thread connecting him to his former self and to the world that no longer perceived him. The irony of his situation was not lost on him. He had come to this room to be a writer, to create stories that would reach and impact others. Now he had become the ultimate invisible author, crafting perhaps the most important work of his life, the documentation of his own erasure. "That is my story," he writes, addressing an unknown audience, hoping that his words will somehow transcend the boundaries of his invisible existence and reach those who might comprehend the extraordinary horror of his situation. As days passed, the bearded man continued to occupy the writer's life with unsettling completeness. He wrote at the desk, using the writer's pen, developing the manuscript that had been the invisible author's passion project. The imposter would receive visitors, converse with the writer's friends and colleagues, and gradually expand his appropriation to include every aspect of the life he had stolen. From the perspective of the world, the writer with the new beard was simply continuing his creative work, perhaps with a slight change in appearance, but otherwise unchanged. The invisible writer observed this usurpation with a complex mixture of emotions: rage at the theft of his identity, fascination with the precision of the impersonation, and a growing philosophical detachment as he contemplated the nature of existence itself. What defined a person if not their physical presence, their voice, their interactions with others? If he could still think, still write, still witness the world, even as it failed to witness him, was he not still real in some fundamental way? These questions formed the backdrop of his continued documentation. He discovered that while he could not interact physically with objects, he could somehow impress his thoughts onto paper, leaving visible traces of his invisible consciousness. This mysterious ability became his obsession, his only means of asserting his continued existence. He wrote feverishly, documenting not only the strange events that had led to his current state, but also his observations of the bearded man and theories about the supernatural mechanism behind his displacement. The bearded imposter seemed unaware of the invisible writer's continued presence in his documentation efforts. Or perhaps, more chillingly, he was aware, but unconcerned, confident in the completeness of his usurpation. This uncertainty tormented the invisible writer. Was he merely a ghost haunting his own stolen life, or was he engaged in a silent battle of wills with an entity that had chosen him specifically for this bizarre identity theft? As his chronicle grew, the invisible writer came to a profound realization. The other man doesn't know one thing. I can write. I can tell my story, and I'm telling it to you. In this declaration, he found a purpose that transcended his personal tragedy. His invisible storytelling became an act of resistance against complete erasure, a means of preserving the truth of his existence despite all evidence to the contrary. The very act of narration became proof of his continued being, even as the physical world denied it. The question that haunted him, that structured his invisible days and nights, was whether his words would ever reach an audience. Would anyone ever read his account and believe in the reality of an invisible writer documenting his own supernatural displacement? Or would his story remain as invisible as he had become, a truth too strange for the world to perceive or accept? In this existential uncertainty, the invisible writer continued his documentation, clinging to the belief that storytelling itself, the act of organizing experience into narrative, might be the most fundamental proof of existence, transcending even the limitations of physical presence and social recognition. Conclusion: echoes of the unseen. The tale of the invisible writer resonates far beyond its supernatural elements, touching on profound questions about identity, creativity, and the very nature of existence. In a world increasingly defined by visibility, by social media presence, public recognition, and constant validation, the writer's experience offers a disturbing metaphor for the fear of erasure that haunts many creative individuals. When our identities become so entwined with our creative output, what remains of us if that connection is severed or appropriated? The bearded man, with his mysterious origin and motivations, represents perhaps our deepest fears as creators, that someone else might claim our work, might step into our lives with such seamless precision that even those closest to us would accept the substitution without question. This doppelganger embodies the anxiety that our uniqueness, our individual perspective and voice, might be replaceable after all. Yet amidst this bleak narrative of identity theft and erasure, a powerful countermessage emerges through the invisible writer's continued ability to document his experience. Though unseen and unheard in conventional ways, he discovers that storytelling itself transcends physical limitations, that the act of bearing witness to one's own experience is a form of existence that cannot be entirely subsumed, even by supernatural forces. I can write, I can tell my story, and I'm telling it to you. In these simple words lies a profound assertion of continued being, a refusal to accept complete erasure. Many questions remain unanswered in this chilling tale. Who or what is the bearded man? Is he a supernatural entity, a manifestation of the room's strange energy, or perhaps a fragmented aspect of the writer's own psyche? What attracted this entity to the writer, and why was this particular form of identity theft enacted? Will the invisible writer ever regain his visible existence? Or is his fate to remain perpetually on the periphery of a life that once belonged to him? The absence of answers to these questions creates a lingering unease that extends beyond the tale itself, inviting us to contemplate our own vulnerabilities to erasure, replacement, and loss of identity. In a digital age where personas can be crafted, manipulated, and sometimes stolen, the boundary between authentic self-expression and performance grows increasingly blurred. The invisible writer's plight speaks to contemporary anxieties about authenticity and recognition in a world where visibility often equates to reality. As we close this unsettling narrative, we're left to ponder the writer's continued invisible existence, documenting a displacement that the world refuses to see. There is something both terrifying and oddly hopeful in his persistence, in the discovery that even when stripped of voice, reflection, and social recognition, the fundamental human impulse to record experience, to say, "I was here, this happened to me," remains undefeated. Perhaps in this persistence, this refusal to accept complete erasure, lies the true power of storytelling, to assert existence beyond physical boundaries, to create connection even from the margins of visibility. The invisible writer continues his documentation, a testament to the enduring power of narrative in the face of existential threat. And we, as readers of his account, become unwitting participants in validating his continued existence, proving through our reception of his words that invisibility need not equal obliteration, that being seen is not the only form of being recognized. In receiving his story, we acknowledge that some truths persist beyond the boundaries of conventional perception, echoes of the unseen that resonate in the spaces between what is visible and what is real. Thank you for joining us for this unsettling journey through The Invisible Writer, a tale that explores the terrifying possibility of losing not just your voice, but your very existence. What would you do if someone began to steal your identity piece by piece until even your closest friends couldn't see the real you? This story reminds us that our deepest fears often lie in the erasure of who we truly are. If you enjoyed this story and the English learning experience, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to LMJ English. Your engagement helps our channel grow and allows us to continue bringing you engaging content that improves your English skills while entertaining you. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on the story or what you might do if you found yourself becoming invisible to the world around you. Thank you again for being part of our English learning community. Until next time, keep reading, keep listening, and keep improving your English with us. We look forward to seeing you in our next storytelling adventure. Key vocabulary list. Invisible. LMJ, unable to be seen. Not visible to the eye. The writer became invisible to everyone around him, even his closest friends. Displacement. In the act of forcing someone or something out of its usual place. The writer experienced a complete displacement of his identity by the bearded man. Manuscript, in a book, document, or piece of music written by hand rather than typed or printed. The bearded man continued writing the manuscript that the original author had started. Usurpation, in the action of taking a position of power or importance illegally or by force. The bearded man's usurpation of the writer's identity was complete and terrifying. Phenomenon, in a fact or situation that is observed to exist or happen, especially one whose cause or explanation is in question. The strange phenomena in the room increased as days passed. Doppelganger, in an apparition or double of a living person. The bearded man was like a doppelganger who gradually took over the writer's existence. Erasure, in the removal or destruction of all traces of something. The writer suffered the complete erasure of his physical presence in the world. Ominous, LMJ, giving the worrying impression that something bad is going to happen. The bearded man's words were ominous. You will never leave here. Solitude, in the state or situation of being alone. The writer had sought solitude to complete his book, but found something far more disturbing. Testimony, in a formal written or spoken statement, especially one given in a court of law. The invisible writer's account serves as his testimony to a supernatural occurrence. Perception, in the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through the senses. The writer existed beyond normal perception, invisible to everyone around him. Apparition, in a ghost or ghost-like image of a person. The bearded man first appeared as an apparition in the mirror before becoming physically present. Transcend, to go beyond the range or limits of something. The invisible writer's ability to write transcended his physical limitations. Manifest, to show or demonstrate clearly. The bearded man manifested in the physical world after appearing only in reflections. Ethereal, ADEJ extremely delicate and light in a way that seems not to be of this world. The writer's existence became increasingly ethereal as his physical presence diminished. Liminal, ADJ relating to a transitional or initial stage of a process, occupying a position at both sides of a boundary. The invisible writer existed in a liminal space between presence and absence. Supernatural, ADEJ attributed to some force beyond scientific understanding or the laws of nature. The writer's transformation was clearly supernatural in nature. Existential, ADEJ relating to existence, especially human existence. The writer faced an existential crisis when his reflection disappeared from the mirror. Chronicle, a factual written account of important or historical events in the order of their occurrence. The invisible writer's narrative became a chronicle of his own disappearance. Validation, in the action of checking or proving the validity or accuracy of something. The writer sought validation of his continued existence through his ability to write.